Tell me if you've heard this one before. Donald Trump indicted. My goodness, here we go again. Good morning on a Wednesday. It's great to be here on KCMO Talk Radio. In case you missed it, and how convenient, right? One day after Hunter Biden's old business partner does a closed session meeting with the House Oversight Committee, and we find out that Joe Biden was on at least 20 phone calls with Hunter's business associates. Magically, I mean, one day after that, you got this guy, Jack Smith, who goes out there and a special counsel indicts Trump in an unprecedented criminal case, accusing him of trying to subvert the will of the American voters through his attempts to cling to power after he lost the 2020 election. The indictment by a federal grand jury in Washington, D.C., charges Trump with 4 crimes: conspiring to defraud the U.S., obstructing an official proceeding, and conspiring against the rights of voters for his actions that culminated in January 6th, 2021. Now, not everything that's bad in politics is illegal, especially in a country that has the First Amendment. But it seems like Joe Biden's Department of Justice has forgotten that. At least that's the conclusion that I came to after yesterday. You know, I sit here and I see the news when it came down, 5 o'clock yesterday came down that Donald Trump was being hit with another indictment. And I'm reading through it. It wasn't that long. It was, I want to say, about 40 pages, and seeing some of the highlights and people talking about it on social media. And I'm thinking to myself, a lot of this is tied back to January 6th. A lot of it. And we've gone over that a million times on this show. And I've given you my opinion on that many times on this show. Donald Trump acted inappropriately leading up to January 6th. And, you know, frankly, even putting together the whole January 6th rally, I thought was just pointless and inappropriate. And it put a lot of his own people, his own supporters, at risk, which is what ended up happening. But we do live in a country that still has the First Amendment, do we not? We do. I mean, Trump can go around and say whatever he wants about the 2020 election. He's allowed to do that. I don't agree with it. You don't have to agree with it. But he's allowed to do it, right? I mean, that is okay. We're all on the same page there. He's allowed to do it. So yesterday, Jack Smith, the guy who's charging Trump in this indictment, special counsel, gave about 2 minutes of remarks. And it was all about January 6th. All about January 6th. And Andy McCarthy, who is a great legal mind, contributor at Fox, writes for National Review. I think he pops in the Wall Street Journal once in a while. He reacted to it immediately on Bret Baier's show last night, which I was watching. And I've got Andy McCarthy's clip here that I want to play for you because Andy says it as well as you can say it on Donald Trump, this most recent indictment by Jack Smith, tying back to January 6th, and what it appears to really be all about.
Just to start with what I heard, Brett, that was one of the most demagogic presentations I've ever seen in a high-profile criminal case. Anyone who listened to that, any normal person reacting to that, would assume that Trump was alleged to have carried out the Capitol riot. The entire presentation that he made was not about what the core charges in his case are. It was about the Capitol riot and the security personnel who were injured in the Capitol riot and who had to fight to defend the Capitol riot. And then you turn to his indictment, he's not charged with the Capitol riot. So if that is what he has to resort to in order to sell his case to the public, I think that's very telling in terms of how compelling his case is. As far as the timeline is concerned, I think he's going to have, if it's a good judge, we'll have to see, he'll have a very hard time getting this case to trial because having decided to already indict him on the Mar-a-Lago case, he's not in a good position to go to court and say, as he said in his remarks, that he wants a speedy trial and he wants to get this case to trial. Now, I know for political reasons they'd love to have the Capitol riot, which he's underscoring, in front of the voters in the run-up to the election.
That's all this is. That's Andy McCarthy last night on Fox News. At this point, if you were to go on the street corner in Overland Park or Liberty, Lee Summit, Kansas City, wherever, and say, can you list out the indictments Donald Trump is dealing with? You'd get a lot of that.
Oh, don't get me started.
Yeah, exactly. You would get a lot of that.
We both know.
Yeah. That's what you would get.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly right. Because that's not the point. The point is not to make sure the public's actually following these stories. The point is not to send Donald Trump to jail for 20 years and have him rotting away in his orange jumpsuit, which I know gets some of you happy inside and gets you a little excited in different ways. But that's not what this is about. This is about keeping the pressure on Trump legally, monetarily, and then also boosting him, by the way, in the primaries to get him the nomination to then, they believe, beat him in 2024. And they can replay January 6th clips. They can talk about the riot. I mean, the way that Jack Smith talks about the riot, you'd think that, Trump was Mel Gibson in Braveheart, the way they talk about him in the riot. Despite we got the guy on tape saying, hey, we're going to march down to the Capitol peacefully. That does not excuse the inappropriateness of how he handled himself leading up to January 6th. I've said this for, what are we, 2.5 years now removed from it? But for crying out loud, the way that Jack Smith is portraying this thing is all about politics and reminding me, hey, don't forget about January 6th. Hey, don't forget about that thing. I know it's in the past. I know it's 2.5 years, and next year will be 3.5, 4 years old. But never forget, they want to bring that up for political purposes. That's what a lot of this appears to be. Because when you actually look at it, when you see everything that went on here and the fallout from yesterday, and by the way, there are 6 co-conspirators listed as well in this indictment, including Rudy Giuliani. But I've got to think here and say to myself, it charges that Donald Trump tried to get his attorney to use the Justice Department to make bogus charges to intimidate states. I've got to wonder if Merrick Garland, who currently runs the DOJ, swallowed awfully hard at seeing that called a crime. You're telling me the people in charge right now have not tried to use their DOJ to advance their political agenda in some way, shape, or form? Really? Is that now the new standard? By the way, I don't have to like any of it. And frankly, I don't. I don't want to be sitting here defending Donald Trump in this case because as much as I thought he was a great president policy-wise, he screwed himself royally in the wake of the 2020 election. And he hurt his future prospects of running for re-election, and we're seeing that play out in real time right now, politically speaking. But at the same time, this is still America, and there still is a First Amendment, and Trump, just like any other citizen, should be allowed to get up there and say what he wants to say about whatever is on his mind, whether you agree with it or I agree with it. And that's what this ultimately comes down to. 913-408-7710 as we get it rolling on a busy Wednesday morning. We're going to talk to Josh Hawley at 7 o'clock this morning about this and much more here on KCMO.
I didn't know if you saw on CNN, they followed Jack Smith on his lunch break, and he went into Jimmy John's, indicating he was possibly in a hurry for these indictments, wanting some fast food freaky fast there.
So he's not a Jersey Mike's guy, you're telling me.
Okay. Not, or Subway.
That's too bad. I like Jimmy John's. Now I can't go anymore.
It indicates he was possibly in a hurry.
Oh, okay. Right. Yeah, had to keep it moving. 913-408-7710 on KCMO Talk Radio, 710 AM and 103.7 FM. Some of you will hear us talk about this latest Trump indictment throughout the morning and think that we're excusing Donald Trump's behavior and excusing some of the things that he did in the wake of November 2020, and that's simply not true. Two things can be true at the same time. Donald Trump acted very inappropriately between Election Day 2020 and January 6th, while at the same time realizing that this guy who continues to get indicted time and time again and is dealing now with another legal issue in the wake of all this is being targeted politically by the guy who beat him in the last election and the guy that he's likely to face in the next election. Both of those things can be true, and both of them, for different reasons, can be wholly inappropriate and wrong. Now, that being said, as I was going through this recent indictment, there's a lot of stuff in here that does not make Trump look good. Talking about phone calls between himself and Mike Pence. It notes here, on several private phone calls in late December and early January, the defendant repeated knowingly false claims of election fraud and directly pressured the vice president to use his ceremonial role at the certification proceeding on January 6th to fraudulently overturn the results of the election. And the vice president resisted, including on December 25th. Now, I'm just picturing this conversation happening. Obviously, Christmas. The VP called the defendant to wish him a Merry Christmas. By the way, Mike Pence is a glutton for punishment, isn't he? What the hell's Mike Pence? Isn't he? I mean, the guy, come on, Mike. Mike Pence is just too good a guy, I think. He knows that Trump's fed up with him. He knows Trump's probably in a bad mood. If Trump remembered it was Christmas, I would have been surprised that year. I mean, hey, Barron, here's your gift. So December 25th, Mike Pence calls the defendant, as they write it here, to wish him a Merry Christmas. Mike, next time, just keep it to yourself, buddy. I mean, what are you looking for here? The defendant quickly turned the conversation to January 6th and his request that the VP reject electoral votes that day. The VP pushed back, telling the defendant, as the vice president already had in previous conversations, I don't think I have the authority to change the outcome. Imagine that. Hey, boss, Merry Christmas. Hey, Mike, you're a wimp. Come on, Mike. Grow some stones. December 29th, as reflected in the VP's contemporaneous notes, the defendant falsely told the vice president that the Justice Department was finding major infractions. Then, New Year's Day, defendant calls Mike Pence, berates him because he had learned the VP had opposed a lawsuit seeking a judicial decision that at the certification, the vice president had the authority to reject or return votes to the states under the Constitution. The VP responded that he thought there was no constitutional basis for such authority and that it was improper. In response, the defendant told the vice president, "You're too honest." You're too honest. Another classic Trump line to his vice president. You're too honest. And that's exactly why Mike Pence was the perfect yang to Donald Trump's yin to yang.
I could see Michael Douglas saying that in Wall Street. Right?
Yeah, that's
too
right.
honest.
You're too honest. That's exactly right. So Mike Pence last night did have something up on Twitter responding to this recent indictment. And he said here, this is Mike Pence, 7:08 last night, "Today's indictment serves as an important reminder. Anyone who puts himself over the Constitution should never be president of the United States. I will have more to say about the government's case after reviewing the indictment. The former president is entitled to the presumption of innocence, but with this indictment, his candidacy means more talk about January 6th and more distractions. As Americans, his candidacy means less attention paid to Joe Biden's disastrous economic policies, afflicting millions across the United States, and to the pattern of corruption with Hunter. Our country is more important than one man. Our Constitution is more important than any one man's career. On January 6th, former President Trump demanded I choose between him and the Constitution. I chose the Constitution, and I always will." And then he goes on to make the pitch. "As your president, I will not yield an inch in defending America, our people, our values, and I promise you, I will do so in a way consistent with my oath to the Constitution and the character and decency of the American people." That's from Mike Pence. Now, it's not going to work. Whether you like Mike Pence or not, the reality is Mike Pence is not going to be the nominee. As of right now, he does not even have and has not met the threshold to get himself on the stage at the first debate on August 23rd. He has not done that. You've got to get 1% in the polls, and you have to have, I think it's 40,000 donors and 200 donors in 20 different states. Mike Pence has not achieved that. But for Mike Pence, I think deep down he probably knows he's not going to be the nominee. But a part of him wants to, I don't know if it's set the record straight. Maybe that's the wrong way to put it. But he's just, I think, enjoying being part of this conversation. And yes, I think that there is a little bit of enjoyment and payback. As much as Mike Pence is a goody two-shoes, he's still a human being. Mike's in Kansas City. What's up, Mike? You're on KCMO. Good morning.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about Trump for just 1 second, but let's go and talk about Al Gore, Al Franken, Hillary Clinton, and Stacey Abrams. They're all people who contested their defeats. They're all people who are doing extra constitutional things to try to get votes and everything, and nobody talks about them. Al Franken, they found 1,400 votes in the trunk of a car. Mm-hmm. You know, if you remember that situation. You know, Al Gore still rants that he won the election and that, you know, people deprived him of the election with the hanging chads and swinging chads and everything like that. So, you know, I'm really sick of this whole thing. It's 100% political. It has nothing to do with reality, with justice, with the law, or anything like that. They're going after Trump. What they're trying to do is get the leading candidate of their opposition hobbled, and so for that.
Yeah.
It's that clear. I think we live in a banana republic right now, you know, with this.
Mike, I mean, all things are accurate that you're bringing up. I mean, you're right. We played the clips, and I'll find it for this morning, where you've got, you know, Hillary Clinton talking about her election being stolen, Al Gore. Yes, I mean, all that stuff is true. And by the way, they all have the right to say it. They're wrong, like Trump, but they got the right to say it. And amazingly, the DOJ never indicted them. And then reaching for January 6th, well, it is a reach. It is. Doesn't mean he handled himself appropriately, but it's certainly a reach and a stretch. But now the world we live in, and none of this is good for the American people. None of this is healthy for the future of the country. When you're out of options and out of ideas, this is apparently what you do instead. And I'm referring to Kansas City Mayor Quinton Lucas, who will be on this show tomorrow morning at 7:30 for the first time in a couple of weeks, since we got some time off the last couple of weeks. And the mayor yesterday gave a speech. He was outside of City Hall at the inauguration ceremony, celebrating the beginning of his second 4-year term and the seating of the new city council. And what's the biggest issue right now in this city? Biggest issue is the homicide rate. This year, we are trending towards a record number of homicides. We have 115 here, but it hasn't been updated for the 2 yesterday. So we're at 117 homicides year to date. Last year at this point, we had 92. In 2020, which is when the city set the record for murders at 179, we had 111. We are several homicides ahead of the record-breaking number of 2020. I mean, and by the way, a lot of major American cities are seeing decreases over the last couple of years in homicides because things are finally calming back down to normal in the wake of the George Floyd BLM insanity.
And that includes right on the other side of the state line in Kansas City, Kansas.
Bingo. Absolutely right. Absolutely right. So Kansas City is not following a similar trend. And there's multiple reasons for that. Number one, you've got a police department that is down several hundred employees and several hundred boots on the ground. And then even if bad guys get arrested, you have a prosecutor in Jackson County who has been slapping criminals on the wrist for far too long. So no one's afraid of anybody in this city or this county. The criminals are not afraid of the people in charge. From City Hall to the prosecutor's office, they do not fear them like they should. So what is the answer? Well, 2 ideas were floated yesterday by the mayor in his speech. And he said that he would introduce these 2 ordinances on Thursday at the council's first regular meeting. One ordinance would prohibit minors from buying ammunition without parental consent. And the other would ban so-called switches. devices that turn handguns into automatic weapons. Now, I read this yesterday because I was in a couple meetings after the show. I wasn't down there at City Hall watching the mayor give his speech. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, am I missing something here? Or is it already federal law that requires you to be 18 years old to buy ammunition for rifles or shotguns? And then it's 21 for handguns. So let me get this straight. The mayor's answer here is to draft and pass an ordinance prohibiting minors from buying ammunition without parental consent when minors already can't buy ammunition. Are you following me here? I know it's 6:37 in the morning and you haven't had your coffee yet and you're like, wait, am I missing something? No, you're not. You're not. One of the great answers on how to reduce the crime rate in Kansas City is to pass an ordinance that's more or less already a federal law. Okay, so now you got to have your parents there. You can't have your parents there to buy ammunition when you can't already buy ammunition when you're under the age of 18. Doesn't even make any sense to me. And then the other one, banning switches, devices that turn handguns into automatic weapons. Well, once again, I wanted to make sure I had all my information correct. It's already illegal under federal law, with convictions carrying a sentence up to 10 years. Looking this up here, this is from February, from thehill.com, Glock switches. Glock switches are illegal under federal law. Convictions carry a sentence up to 10 years. 1986, Firearm Owners Protection Act made the new machine gun illegal for civilians to own. Putting a Glock switch on a gun is legal here. Reading this, possession of a Glock switch is also illegal in and of itself. Someone caught with a Glock switch can face up to 10 years in prison if prosecuted at the federal level. That's 3 different sources I'm reading from here. So we're going to pass ordinances at the city level on things that are already illegal under federal law. Explain to me, and I'm happy to hear the case because I'm not sitting here as some kind of expert on the issue when it comes to gun laws, but explain to me how that makes any sense and what that's going to do, right? You've got lunatics running around the streets of this town, murdering people left and right at record-setting rates. Do we really think that if a 17-year-old kid has to, is unable to buy ammunition? Are there places where they're already buying ammunition? And if so, go after those places, by the way. I mean, you can go after the places that are selling ammo to minors, right? Just like you can if they're selling alcohol to minors. If the city knows, if law enforcement in this town knows that there are specific ammo shops that are selling ammunition to minors, then line them up. Go after them. They're breaking the law. That doesn't seem all that difficult. But this sounds to me like leadership that is out of ideas or doesn't want to admit what the real problems are. Therefore, they've got these vanity ordinances that are supposed to do something but will do nothing. Will do absolute, kind of like when they were suing the gun manufacturers a couple of years ago. Geez, that work out too well for you? Didn't think so. Now, when you look at Kansas City at large, by the way, and I do want to push back on this narrative a little bit, that Kansas City has a massive homicide problem. Now, don't get me wrong, it does. But it only has it in Jackson County. And that's, once again, if I'm looking at this just from the standpoint of, okay, where are my problems? What are my problems? You got to identify the problems first. Kansas City does not have a murder problem. Kansas City and Jackson County has a murder problem. When you look at, out of the 117 murders this year, they break them down on the website, on the KCPD website by patrol division. Between North Patrol and Shoal Creek up north, a total of 3 homicides. That's all up north. And then the other 114 are Central Patrol, Metro Patrol, East Patrol, and South Patrol. So if I'm genuinely trying to get to the bottom of this, and I'm genuinely trying to figure out the problem and be a problem solver, I'm looking at that and I'm saying, what's that? Why would that be the case? What's that all about? Let's analyze this. And it's not just about socioeconomic levels, by the way. It's not. I know it's an easy, cheap answer for those who want to, drive class warfare, but it's not that. There's plenty of working class folks up north. There's plenty of people who are not wealthy up north. Maybe it has something to do with, call me crazy, maybe it has something to do with where the criminals think they can get away with their crimes. And yes, poverty is obviously a major driver, but it's also unfair. And this is an important point, I believe, in the conversation. Because what you're going to hear is, whenever this comes up, we've got to invest more in certain communities. It's unfair and it's insulting to poor people to insist that they are criminals because they are simply poor. The vast majority of poor people in Kansas City and the vast majority of poor people in this country are not criminals. And to say that their poverty is the reason for crime is an insult to any working class or poor person who is just trying to get ahead and create a better future for themselves and their families and their kids. And anytime that comes up, and if that comes up in a conversation tomorrow or anywhere, I'm going to say, pump the brakes a second here. Are you suggesting that poor people are more likely to commit crimes because they're poor? Because that's not fair to them. The overwhelming majority of poor people are not criminals. So to point to the poverty is not pointing to the problem that really exists. And the problem that really exists continues to be being several hundred cops short, which, by the way, was not brought up in yesterday's inauguration speech. And then on top of that as well, it's the fact that you've got people who do not pursue and prosecute the worst of the worst. 913-408-7710. At 6:44 on a Wednesday morning. Kevin is in Overland Park. Hello, Kevin. Good morning.
Hey, Pete. How are you doing?
I'm well. What's up, man?
Well, I was just going to respond to your question of why they were pass these ordinances when there's already federal laws in place, like a pandering or something, or even trying to buy votes, so to speak, of what I'm doing in the city here, so to speak, rather than people that are voters that are uninformed of, there's federal laws that already cover that.
Maybe that's it. I mean, that makes as much sense as anything else, Kevin. It's like, well, when people say, just do something, right? Okay, here's what I'm doing, knowing that it's not going to do anything.
Exactly.
And
but it makes uninformed voters feel better.
Yes. I believe that as well, Kevin. Thanks, man. It makes uninformed voters feel better. Hey, they're going to do something at City Hall about this. You mean do something like pass an ordinance that's already federal law? Help me with that. 913-408-7710. As we roll through a Wednesday morning on KCMO Talk Radio, Josh Hawley will join me just after 7 o'clock. We'll talk with him about the recent indictment of Donald Trump. Don't miss Josh Hawley just around the corner. You get an indictment, and you get indicted, and you get indicted, and you get indicted. It's like the Oprah meme. You get a car, and you get a car, except it's always Trump who's getting the indictment. That's kind of what we're living through right now. I mean, if you were to go in the street corner in Kansas City and say, hey, do you hear Trump got indicted again? I'm sure people would say yes. I mean, you'd have to be blind and deaf and not follow the news to see what's gone on here the last 24 hours. But then if you were to dig a little deeper and you were to say to people, do you know why he has been indicted once again? And could you list the Trump indictments, the federal ones, the state level ones? Could you list the Trump indictments? And could you tell me, let's just say, for example, what they're about? The average person, and you're not the average person because you're listening to this show, but the average person could not do it. They just couldn't. And frankly, for the most part, the media knows that. They understand that. But for them, this is not simply about making sure that you're aware of all the indictments. It's just a reminder to you that you might be in this place right now in August of 2023 where you long for the days of the Donald Trump economy, let's say, right? Inflation was low. Unemployment was low. Times were good. The lowest end of the socioeconomic scales were seeing the highest increases in wages. Things were going very well. And you might be longing for those days. But remember, you can't long for those days because the guy who was running the show was a criminal. That's in large part what this is about. That's in large part what is driving this and motivating this. It is political. Before anything else, it is political. It is about next year. It is about the election. I don't think any of the people in charge that are pushing this, Jack Smith, anyone else, I don't think any of them, and this is just my opinion, but I don't believe any of them actually think that Trump's going to prison or something like that. They just know that when it comes to the timeliness of it, geez, how convenient. One day after, by the way, you get this bombshell testimony behind closed doors of Hunter Biden's former business partner saying, yeah, Joe Biden was on the phone at least 20 times with Hunter while we were dealing with business associates in Ukraine and Russia and everywhere else. While that's going on, one day later, this indictment comes down. Boy, that's awfully convenient, is it not? What does that say about where we're at today politically? You know, I kind of joked about it earlier in the week. I said, geez, you know, you got this testimony tomorrow of this guy, Devin Archer. That was on Tuesday. They're going to have to hit Trump with some indictment. They got to get this guy Archer out of the news. And by the way, they barely covered the Archer thing. NBC News, NBC Nightly News. I don't know if you saw this, but it made the rounds. NBC Nightly News on Tuesday night. Lester Holt. They did not even mention the Hunter Biden story. You heard that right. They did not mention it. CBS and ABC did apparently like a minute and a half on it out of their 30-minute newscast. NBC Nightly News did not mention it. So even though it was and is an enormous political story, they're not touching it. But now that they got Trump, they really don't have to touch it. They cannot be forced to cover it. You can't twist their arm because now they got Trump again for a third time on an indictment. Now, I do think, you know, one indictment helps Trump. Two indictments help Trump. At some point, there's diminishing returns on these indictments for Trump, politically speaking. And that's something that has to be noted as well and should be discussed. But either way, it is solidifying him as the nominee. And in part, I believe that's a goal for the Democrats, by the way. They don't want to, I think that they believe, not that they don't think Trump can win. I mean, the polling would suggest recently that Trump does have a chance. Trump can possibly pull it off again, just like he did back in 2016. But they think that he's their best bet. I believe they think he's their best bet because they can run campaign ad after campaign ad of January 6th and, you know, this and all these, you know, indictments. They can talk about Trump's legal woes and accusations and everything else. That's their best bet. And they know that deep down. Josh Hawley was scheduled to join us here just after 7 o'clock on KCMO Talk Radio. We'll see if we can get connected with him later on this morning and see if that's possible because I know there's a lot of moving parts on his end. So, but this is one of those things as we try to get that lined up right now. That's the beauty of live radio. It is what it is. But when you look at this right now from afar, the biggest issue the Democrats have today, I believe, is that if Trump were to get the nomination, there's a chance that, yes, he can win. But the way that he wins, that people are so dissatisfied with them and there's low voter turnout. That's what happened to him in 2016, right? People just didn't like Hillary Clinton. And a lot of people did not show up to vote, especially some of their core constituents didn't show up to vote. Black men did not show up to vote in 2016. And that happened again, by the way. This is not a thing that's gotten a lot of attention, but black men 2020 to 2022, from the presidential to the midterms, the drop was double digits on turnout for black men in the midterm elections. And that's actually from 2018 to 2022. You want to compare midterm to midterm, not presidential to midterm. 2018 to 2022, the drop in black men voting was down double digits on a percentage base. That's not good for the Democratic Party. And don't forget, too, that, Donald Trump in Wisconsin, which he won, he beat Hillary Clinton in Wisconsin. But Donald Trump got less overall votes in Wisconsin than Mitt Romney did back in 2012. What does that signal? Low voter turnout, specifically for Hillary Clinton back in 2016. The biggest fear for the Democrats is there's a malaise around Joe Biden because he's just a corrupt old white politician. Right? I mean, that's what he's turned out to be. And that's not good for their voter turnout. A lot of that stuff is things they didn't like about Hillary Clinton, especially with their core voting blocks. So what do they have to do to drum up voter enthusiasm? You're not going to convince people that their lives are better off than 40 years ago. You're not going to convince people that you're fighting corruption or you're some trailblazer. The only way you can get people out to vote for Joe is in a binary situation. You get them to hate Trump so much they show up to the polls. And these indictments help facilitate that as well, because no one's going to vote for him based on what's actually been done on behalf of the country. 913-408-7710. We have just rebooked Josh Hawley for 7:35 this morning, so we apologize for that. But the Missouri U.S. Senator will be here in 20 minutes on KCMO Talk Radio 710 AM and 103.7 FM. In the meantime, head up the training camp. Join the World Champs next Tuesday, August 8th in St. Joe. We got a pair of tickets this week. Parking's included, access to the tent for light refreshments as well. The text to win keyword is PASS to 913-408-7710. That's PASS, PASS to 913-408-7710 for your chance at 2 tickets to training camp next Tuesday up in St. Joe. So we'll get to Josh Hawley, bottom of the hour. Coming up, you won't believe who apparently is fat shaming. And I did go to the polls yesterday on the Kansas side of the state line, and the voting experience was more interesting than I expected. We'll get to those coming up next. I was going to ask Mark to bump back with a song from our next story here, but I don't think you could bump back with a song from this next person without a curse word every 7 seconds. So I decided against asking Mark to do that. Lizzo. How about Lizzo? All right, our favorite fat artist to remind you that she's fat and big is beautiful and the whole thing, right? She is obese by every definition of the word, but you're supposed to just accept that for what it is, and you're supposed to think that that is beautiful and healthy because, well, she's proud of it. It's like, no, if you're obese, that's unhealthy. That's not good for you. I mean, you can be proud of it. It's not about looks. Some people may like that, but it doesn't mean it's healthy. But Lizzo has made a career off of being a bad singer who is really fat and who prides herself on being really fat. And if you say she's really fat, well, you're being mean or something like that. It's like, no, people can like your music. I don't, but people can like your music while also admitting you should probably, for your own health, lose some weight. Well, I bring this up because Lizzo's being sued for fat shaming her dancers. Lizzo allegedly fat shamed her own dancers.
Talk about a bombshell.
You're making this up.
No. I'm not, John. Here's the story. 3 of Lizzo's former dancers have accused the singer of sexual harassment and creating a hostile work environment in a lawsuit filed yesterday. They also allege she pressured one of them to touch a nude performer at an Amsterdam club and subjected the group to an excruciating audition after leveling false accusations that they were drinking on the job. The dancers accused Lizzo, a performer known for embracing body positivity and celebrating her physique, of calling attention to one dancer's weight gain and later berating and then firing that dancer after she recorded a meeting because of a health condition. Now, of course, it's a lawsuit. It may not be true, but there's something rich about the idea that Lizzo would fat shame anybody. And that's why it's almost too bizarre to suggest this in a lawsuit without it being true. Because if there's one thing you would never assume Lizzo would do, it would be fat shaming anybody. Because Lizzo's made a career being the victim of fat shaming. Like, literally, that's half of her career, is saying, I'm happy and content in my obese body, and you better not fat shame me. And she's allowed to check off and play the victim card. So now apparently she's fat shaming other people, her own dancers, by the way. I mean, whew, boy, oh boy, oh boy. That was awfully rich. So I just wanted to share that with you here on a Wednesday morning because I saw the headline last night, and I'm like, you got to be, who's pulling my leg here? Is this the Babylon Bee? That's the scary part now. You see headlines, and you think that it's the Babylon Bee, and then you realize it's not. It's like the real story, the real news. So I hope if it's true that they get everything they can out of Lizzo if she's this big of a hypocrite, which would not be shocking for somebody in Hollywood to be this big of a hypocrite. Yesterday, went to the polls on the Kansas side of the state line, and there were less places to vote yesterday because it was such a low turnout election in many parts of the county. You had some school board primaries, you had some city council primaries, and I was surprised at the turnout. I took Chloe, our 2-year-old, and I expected to kind of waltz right in, and for the most part I did. There was no line, but there was a steady flow of people in and out of my polling place yesterday. And that was surprising, but it was also, I was encouraged by that. I was encouraged to see in early August of an odd year where there's not a lot on the ballot. It's not like it's last year when Value Them Both was on the ballot and lines were out the door in an even year. But you had this off year where people were actually showing up to vote. And I was pretty pleased by that. By the way, as for some of the election results, just want to run through these real quick. Olathe City Council, at-large councilman, lost his primary race. Wes McCoy did not make it to the runoff. Who did? Matthew Schoonover. He's an attorney here, supported by the Johnson County Democrats. He led the way. Followed by Wayne Janner, serves on the City Planning Commission, supported by the GOP. But here's the thing. The guy supported by the Johnson County Democrats in Olathe, 6,500 votes. Wayne Janner, supported by the GOP, 2,500 votes. Incumbent Wes McCoy got 2,100. Has anyone heard from the Johnson County Republican Party as of late? Or the state party? At Bueller? Is the Kansas GOP anywhere to be found? What about the Johnson County Republican Party? Has anyone heard from them lately? I've been looking under rocks around town, and I can't find them anywhere. Where's their get out the vote movement? What are they doing? I haven't heard from them at all. Either party, either group over the last few weeks. And by the way, you've got these local races that matter. Johnson County Democrats are officially getting involved in these races at the school board level, at the city council level, in places like Olathe that are typically right of center. And they're winning these races, by the way, these primaries, by huge numbers. And I'm not hearing a peep from the Johnson County GOP or the state party. And it would seem to me that, these local races, which oftentimes have a much bigger impact on our day-to-day lives than, what's happening in Washington, D.C., I'd like to think that somebody somewhere is doing something ahead of November, but I see no evidence to suggest that anything is happening. And by the way, the people that are in charge are people who thought the prior folks were doing bad jobs on this front, and they promised a better job at the grassroots level. And I have seen nothing to suggest that's the case. Not a single thing. ACLU's coming for you up there in Platte County. Unbelievable. Lawsuit this week as we approach 8 o'clock. Good morning on a Wednesday. Lawsuit this week claims the Platte County School District denied a transgender student's use of school bathrooms that matched her gender identity. This from the Platte County Landmark. The lawsuit filed in Platte County Circuit Court on Monday by the ACLU. And by the way, if the ACLU is suing you, you're doing the right thing. The ACLU, which used to have a purpose and now is just funded by left-wing operatives. If you're getting sued by the ACLU, now, unfortunately, it's going to cost the taxpayer up there probably a pretty penny to defend this, but it's well worth it, and you're doing the right thing up there in Platte County. Court papers identify the student as initials RF, a 16-year-old transgender student. The allegations indicate the school punished the students for using the girls' restroom at the Platte County High School in 2021. So this is a boy who is identifying as a girl who was using the girls' restroom. And by the way, had done this on multiple occasions, and the school invoked suspensions. So according to the petition filed with the court, the student, RF, the initials since it's a minor, began the medical transition from male to female in early 2019. The lawsuit alleges in the fall of 21, when RF was a freshman, she was told by the assistant principal to use either the restroom that matched the sex she was assigned at birth or the single gender neutral bathroom in the school. Now, that's where the defense of this goes out the window. If you are somebody who believes that a boy who's identifying as a girl should not be required to use the boys' room, okay. All right, you might be able to make that case. But you cannot justify that same person using the girls' room when there's a single gender-neutral bathroom in the school that is available to you. That's where your argument goes out the window, right? If there's a single gender-neutral bathroom in the school, and to make everybody feel comfortable, the school is saying, it's not our business to get involved in whatever you're doing. But at the very least, we can't open up this Pandora's box and have you just walking into a girl's room as still a biological male. We can't have you doing that for a multitude of reasons. Because what's to stop some random student, some random boy from walking into class and saying, hey, I'm a girl today and I'm going to use the women's room. You are opening up a can of worms. So if you've got a single gender neutral bathroom in the school, then go for it. And the argument's done. So, but here's the catch in that, right? The catch in that, according to the lawsuit, is that the gender-neutral restroom was not close to the students' classes, and it frequently had a long line. That's not an excuse. That's not. Now, let's be honest. You've all seen this sometimes if you go to a sporting event or a concert where there's a long line for the women's room. And then if you're in the men's room, where usually guys at a sporting event are not using the stalls, you've seen a, let's say, drunk woman walk out of the guys' room using one of the stalls.
Co-ed.
Yes. We've all seen that at a game or a concert, right?
Certain venues are small.
It's happened before. I'm not denying that's happened. But that's not an excuse. A long line is not an excuse to not abide by the rules that the school set. And the school was clearly trying to work with this student, right? The school was saying, hey, we can't have you using the girls' room for obvious reasons. However, we've got this single gender restroom for you. It might be a little out of your way, but I'm sorry, you got to do it. To make everybody comfortable, you got to do it. And having the excuse of, well, there's a line there and it's not right around the corner from where I'm taking classes cannot be an excuse. But that's what the ACLU is now leaning on here. And the ACLU is leaning on this and the lawsuit and saying that the student was given in-school suspension as punishment for using the girls' restroom and then got a 2 days out of school suspension for using the girls' restroom once again. At some point, you either want to be a team player and work with the school that's trying to work with you, or you just want to be a political activist. And that's where the sympathy goes out the window on my end. You want to work with people, you want to do right by them, but it's got to be a two-way street. Coming up next on KCMO Talk Radio, a new study on the political leanings, speaking of high school, political leanings of high school students. And it paints two very different pictures based on gender. We'll get to that next.